How's it going, guys? Well, welcome to TheBlueShifting and welcome to the rap party. Normally I play like an actual intro trailer, but the only trailers for Vampire the Masquerade Coteries of New York is either super dialogue heavy, which doesn't really mesh with the intro, or it was just stills anyway. So instead I'll be doing an introduction. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. Hopefully things are going well. I've got kind of some crazy family stuff going on, I might have a cat who is attempting to sprint up and down the hallway, for instance, and yowling, so you might hear a bit of that going on in the background, but, oh well. Such is life. How's it going? So thank you guys so much for being here. Anyone who's joining us live, I look forward to reading any of your comments. And then, of course, all of those, the rest of you who are here just kind of as part of the playlist, in the future, welcome to kind of my capstone. Again, this is what I call our rap party, where we kind of celebrate the ending of one of our stories, talk about it, kind of go over some of the details, my impressions of it, especially as I do more of the backdoor stuff, where I explore more of the game that I don't show on the channel. So I can give an overall kind of comprehensive feel to it, and just kind of be able to share with you my personal expressions of it. So I hope that you find this at least somewhat enjoyable. Again, thank you for just being a part of this at all. It's always fun, and I reserve Fridays specifically for series that it's kind of a twofold thing. I specifically wanted to make sure on my channel about a year and a half ago, I made a conscious decision to make sure I always make time for titles that might not be big headliners. Stuff that doesn't catch a ton of people's interest right away, or things that are either old enough to not be really talked about anymore, or maybe new releases from new developers, because despite what people sometimes claim, visual novels are still a pretty popular medium to be making. Granted, I don't think they're all the highest of qualities, and sometimes they have some, they have a little bit of issues, but 9 times out of 10, they're still an enjoyable series, an enjoyable experience that I am very happy to be a part of. And I've found some amazing gems through this process, like Seabed. Seabed is honestly one of the best visual novels I played, and I genuinely had never heard about it. There wasn't much being talked about it, and I kind of stumbled upon it the way I find a lot of other series, and so I'm always going to try and make sure I make time for such as this. And Vampires the Masquerade Courtiers of New York is one of these titles that's definitely surprised me. But unfortunately, not in all good ways, and I do have a lot of things to say about this one because, well, we'll get into that in greater detail, but for now, let's just jump into kind of the meat of it. So, and during my playthrough, we went through the play style of the character who normally is named Lamar, but I named him Protag because that's kind of a thing here. But typically, Lamar is like the standard name he comes with that recommends. And he's the Toreador, there's the Venture, and the Bruja. Bruja is Eric, and the Venture is Amanda. They're the main characters you can play the routes of. Now, the first thing I wanted to know, well, there are 2 main points I want to know about this when I did my playthrough. I wanted to know, does the other, clans that you can play, do they feel different? I really wanted to make sure that there was that feel that there was going to be a genuine difference between the two. I also wanted to understand what endings were possible. Did I get a bad ending or a good ending, or was there not really much option there? And sadly, I kind of have to come around to the belief that they were both on the negative side of that spectrum. As I played through with the Bruja Eric, I anticipated being able to play from the perspective of an anarch, not part of the Masquerade. Well, okay, the Masquerade's still a thing for them, but being part of the Camarilla. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The story plays out exactly the same, and that's the same with Amanda as well. I mean, the beginning's a little bit different, your sire's different, but ultimately you get right back onto the same line of thought, and the choices are identical. There may have been a slight difference in the tone of the dialogue for your character, but other than that, I really didn't see any difference. And then it continued on. I experienced some of the other side characters, the side stories, and I have to say, there were some impressive things there. I'm going to talk about my favorite characters, my not so favorite characters, probably in a little bit, but of the side questing, I think that was my favorite part of the game. I liked how there was a set timetable, that you couldn't talk to everybody, and thus the way you spent your time was important. I really enjoyed that aspect of the game. I think visual novels like one of the best features of visual novels, separate from the amazing ability to communicate a powerful story through a combination of music, visuals, and like dialogue, heavy character based dialogue and long descriptions and like character arcs and story arcs. The next best thing is the ability for interactive play. Not every visual novel needs to have interactive play. Some of the best ones I've read had next to none. Others that have been my favorites have had incredible amounts of interactive play with lots of bad endings. You know, like all together, like it's how you execute it that matters, not what you actually are executing. And the downside is that when you're writing a story and you are given choices, the best way, I think, to express choices is to be able to have something that can play out differently based on what you choose. And Vampire Courtiers of New York, unfortunately, doesn't really seem to deliver on that. My second playthrough, I specifically did a non-violent playthrough. I did my absolute best to stay at a level where I didn't need to drink blood, so you get the blood smears on the side of the screen letting you know that your hunger is becoming powerful. I did everything I could to not use my powers so that I didn't feel like I had to pull upon that energy very much. And then when I did see the energy, I sought to drink as little blood as possible, just enough to make it go away, and then I never did it again. And unfortunately, the story really didn't change. I never failed any quests. I never ran into any problems I couldn't solve without using my powers. And frankly, the powers didn't even seem that different. It seemed like the powers that you get access to solve your problems almost universally were simply superhuman speed or superhuman strength. Some of the other vampires you interact with can do things like turning invisible or doing blood magic. And you're supposed to be of 3 different clans, and yet I've struggled to see any difference between the clans as far as the gameplay was concerned. Now I understand that that's difficult. Like, it's hard making games, and it's hard making games like this one, like something that's got like an in-depth universe and in-depth characterizations. Like, I don't think it's really a stain because there is something majestic about this story and the way they're telling it. But when it comes to what they could have had, I think they fell short. If they were going to have such a unique and interesting like choice mechanic, especially with the way you spend your free time, well, quote unquote free time, the downside is that these choices ultimately felt very hollow and not really diverse between the 3. So like it's like they designed the game intentionally to make it so that they had replay value, so you could play it 3 different times, 3 different characters, and have 3 different outcomes. And yet, from what I can tell, that's not even remotely true. Maybe it was a false execution. Maybe it was a false pulling of the trigger. I did find I could get a bad end if you're the belligerent at the very beginning of the game when you're being inducted into potentially being executed. If you don't do things just right, you get executed. But as far as I can tell, that's the only dead end I could really find. Granted, I don't think I was being suicidal. I mean, I'm sure I could have found a bad ending if I had let the beast take over, for instance, but I never tried that because I was curious to see if the ending would change if you did things differently. Unfortunately, no. And no, it didn't. So my biggest disappointment, I think, is that this feels like an elaborate like prelude to something bigger. Like maybe this is like a soft introduction to like something akin to Bloodlines 2, Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines 2 that's coming out, where it's going to be a much more like, you know, open world adventure Skyrim style story where you run around a whole city and the gameplay mechanics are like torn between combat and interacting with a 3D environment. And that this could be something seen like as a prelude to it, where it would just simply be introducing a setting and characters, but ultimately not delivering on an actual arcing story. Because you have to admit, if you watch this all the way through with me, that ending was anticlimactic and insanely abrupt. It felt like we went from like kind of going through the motions and like playing things out to something being at the end and we're done. And it was just almost mind-boggling that it would be so almost stagnant in the way it was executed, and that's sad. It had so much potential and had so much going for it. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about your courtiers. Like now, like there's a good selection of them, and like I said, one of the things I really do like is the fact that that time limit does not allow you to meet all of them on one playthrough. I think that's a strength. I think sometimes games can pretend to have a time limit, but they don't actually. A good example of that, I think, is the difference between Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 2, there were some specific long-term impacts that were made if you played the story out too slowly. If you didn't side quest enough, characters were likely to die. If you made poor choices, characters were likely to die. If you didn't try and rescue your crew fast enough, they were likely to die. And it could be felt like you had to really understand the game mechanics and try hard to even make it likely that people would survive the whole way through. That's awesome. That feeling. It can kind of suck the first time through, but it feels so like visceral when it happens. But then Mass Effect 3 stepped back from that, where they imply you have this like time clock of like trying to bring around the final battle, and that you have to gain enough strength to get there in order to win. But then it turned out that not only did you not really feel that pressure because you kind of pulled the trigger when you wanted to, but it also, the difference between the two was a cutscene. And then after that, there was literally almost nothing that happened differently. And that's kind of what the Vampire's Courtiers of New York did. It had a pretense of time, and while you couldn't, like, there was a limit on who you could meet, it had no impact on the story, whoever you met. So I'll talk about that in a little bit, but first let's go through some of the characters that kind of stuck out. Now, of the core cast, I thought they were all pretty good. I liked the Prince. She really came across as like a political leader who like is soft-spoken, but like you know that she would not hesitate to rip your throat out. They did a great job characterizing her. Quadier, the sheriff, he's genuinely terrifying. I really liked him as a character. He was genuinely intimidating. I think that was a really nice touch. And Sophie Langley, again, just a pariah of politics. Like, she was just dripping with like intentions and shadow controlling and manipulation, and I loved it. I think they did a great job capturing that type of atmosphere with somebody who was going to be manipulating you from the beginning and wasn't even really that shy about it either. So they were pretty solid characters. And then we jump into some of the like the people, the companions. Whom you can meet. There were a couple that were like genuine companions and some that were kind of partial companions. My favorite, I think, as a character and a concept, again, was the first one I chose, Agathon. Agathon was freaking awesome. His story is interesting. I thought the blood magic was fascinating, and I'm actually excited because Bloodlines 2 is going to have Tamara as one of the playable clans, and so I'm thinking I'm probably going to try and join up with it just because I thought that the concept was really fun and interesting. We'll have to see, of course, but I do plan to play that game and I'm going to play it. But Agathon's storyline was really interesting. I thought he was a memorable character, maybe not the most entertaining, but genuinely enjoyable. Then I think the other one that was really impressive on my playthrough was Hope. Hope kind of kept me guessing. I was worried they were going to be replaying some story beats from Masquerade 1, but they took a different direction with it in the end, and she ended up kind of coming into her own, having a lot of personal conflict that we ended up resolving. All in all, she's a very fleshed out character, somebody who was really enjoyable to watch and be a part of. Her story and genuinely kind of attacks an idea of the Masquerade that's different. Again, remember, I'm only vaguely aware of the tabletop game. I've always been curious to try it, but never had anyone to try it with. You know, and obviously you can't play this kind of a game by yourself, and except in Bloodlines. But I loved Bloodlines 1. I'm excited for Bloodlines 2. So I think Hope was one of the most intrinsic. This idea where she explored like a modernist type vampire was really fun. Her quirkiness, it was very memorable and impactful. And I also liked how there was that touch of innocence to the monster with her, where she genuinely had real emotions that she wrestled with and struggles that she had, especially working with her. I mean, I don't think it ever conclusively said it was her sire. Oh, yeah, her sire, but like I'm pretty sure like her, like the vampire you have to fight against with her was her sire. That was just a really interesting dynamic and story to follow through. Not so much a fan of. I think it was it was Benoit. He was the one who was really obsessed with the church. I thought that the exploration of faith in the universe was interesting. I'm really grateful that I got to learn that, but the story wasn't all that interesting. I was really excited to see like those inquisitors that popped up in the chapel. I was hoping we'd have some kind of like interaction with them, or they would like burst in on us with the priest, and like the priest would try and like tell them to not attack us, and maybe we'd have like a stalemate in the house where like we're mortal enemies trying to kill each other, but the priest stops us all. I thought that would have been a really cool like exploration of attitude, and like maybe we could attack them anyway, or we could try and leave peacefully. But no, ultimately it was just kind of like became really strange at the end. I don't know, I just didn't feel much about it. And then I didn't get to finish Frank's story, but I did in a second playthrough, and it honestly was kind of disappointing. And for Frank's story, like you can get him to try and get to hire him about like who he's working for, but then SI shows up and assassinates him, and then you have to flee. Like that's literally how it ends. Almost nothing else happens, so it was kind of a dead end anyway, and just frustrating ultimately. Then there were two other characters that I explored in my second playthrough. They were the two I couldn't like really meet up with or talk to, and unfortunately they became some of my favorites overall. Like even more than Hope and Agathon, I think the characters of D'Angelo and Tamika were probably top tier. Tamika was kind of like the more bestial type, a gangrel. She was really fun. Her and her brother, they're in the park. She explores these really cool abilities where she has like almost like Disney princess powers, but like the dark version where she can like talk to animals and has a bond with them. But they have a whole like episode where they like track an ancient vampire who gets captured by SI, and like we go and find one of their holdout bases and try and free him. And then SI responds and tries to kill her and her brother. And then like we have to like leave it at that, implying that there could be a future plot there. That was really well done. But she as a character was really memorable. And then D'Angelo, oh my goodness, he was a Nosferatu, which this game kind of debunked my impression of them, because my first impression of them is that they're like just kind of meh, you know, like whatever. Like I had a similar opinion of them than the most of the Camarillo seemed to, but D'Angelo was one of the best characters. He's like a detective, and like you kind of go on this like buddy cop story with him, where you go and investigate crime scenes and try and puzzle things out, and you're trying to figure out this like connection to Thin Bloods and these deaths that have been occurring and like what's going on. And it's a really fun and very humanized. It's probably the most humane of all the characters that you meet in the story, where he has his like reservations about the life that they lead and the way that people like the way that their kind interact with others. It's really fascinating, but really, really fun at the same time. So like he gets the crown of my favorite character that we get to interact with in the game, just because as a character he's just A tier. So good, so much fun. And then we get to the ultimate story. So the whole thing with Sophie trying to meet Torque, interesting. How it all goes south, very interesting. Callahan, what a jerk face. The fact that he makes an offhand like racist remark actually prevented my video from getting monetized, which is fine. Like I don't really care that much about monetization. It's nice to have like a little bit of support on the channel, but the idea ultimately is the fact that that video also got suppressed because of that. That's kind of the biggest reason why it's good to monetize, is because like YouTube actively does not promote unmonetized videos. Like they can still go viral, but like they have to do it at their own merits. YouTube never pushes it if it's not going to be making money off of it. They claim otherwise, but I mean, come on, it only makes sense. So that video and videos when that happens gets very vested, and it's like unfortunate because it's like it was such a little thing that was mentioned by a character that was obviously just supposed to like tick the boxes of I'm the bad guy, which is really unfortunate. I think the best villains are the villains that you can kind of understand, and that is my biggest gripe with this entire series, this entire game so far. It's trying to be so secretive and so mysterious. It kind of wraps back around and goes right up its own butt. It's like, it sounds weird to say that, but it's so true. Like, the bad guy of the entire series is just this random dude you've like seen literally like 3 times. You can interact with once, kind of, and even then it's just a like kind of a half conversation. And then like he gets revealed, he's like, I'm the mastermind all the time. And like you just like literally none of your choices end up mattering. He always interferes, he jumps in at the last second, and he takes a weird affection to you and offers you a deal to join him and become part of his little mini crew. And then it ends on a cliffhanger of like, well, what do you want to do? And then it ends. No change, nothing in that conversation at the end. Like there was no actions that you can do to change it or to give Sophie a chance to defend herself. You think a vampire who's as skilled as her and so good at like reacting and like even like kind of anticipating backstabbing, who was like probably had a plan for when Torque would turn on her, because like who wouldn't prepare for that? And yet when someone turns on her whom she doesn't expect, she literally just like lets herself die without even putting up a struggle. I don't know, like it bothered me. It seems so against like who Sophie is and what made her like unique. I think the whole aspect and motivations of the characters didn't really make sense, especially because like the only explanation we get for the villain and what he's doing is an exposition over a course of 5 minutes, but right before the end credits roll. Like that's not a villain. Like I can't really have any emotion or genuine feeling for that guy other than annoyance, because I feel like he was so poorly like explored as a character, and it's just frustrating. You know, like there's nothing interesting about something like that. Not really. And so I think they really dropped the ball there. And that's kind of the ultimate like capstone to this. I think, first of all, like top points, this game's visuals are like jaw-dropping. All the kinetic scenes are fantastic. I love visual novels and I love their static scenes, but a kinetic scene like this game showcases and like we're seeing in the background right now, it gives so much life to the story. I can't imagine that this is easy to make, and probably ate up on the majority of the budget that this game had, whatever it was. But man, was it eye candy to look at. I loved it. It'd be really fascinating to see if more visual novels could do something like this. But again, it's something that eats so much budget. I almost think its problem is that it probably curtailed what it could have been. Because, like, again, what it has in visuals, it really drops the ball on in story development. I mean, it felt way too short. Like, I don't have a problem with not being able to visit and talk to every single character before the end. I think it's good that you have to choose and be selective, and it gives you some wiggle room, but not too much. You have to kind of be clever about things. But in the end, what did it even matter? Because the ending takes place so quickly, and and so much of it is literally has nothing to do with the choices you make. I just don't understand who thought that was a good idea. Because it literally, it invalidates the rest of the game. That the mechanically was on a good start. It had a good foundation. It had something it was building toward that I think was good. And I feel like the problem is that this feels like a part one. Like, doesn't this, like the way it ends, it feels like that should have been the end of a chapter. And then chapter 2, you start to see consequences of things, like characters whom you met and helped. End up, like they have complications for helping you, and they have to deal with that, and you have to help them with that. And then who knows, maybe did you trust somebody who might stab you in the back? Maybe that could be a twist in the second part, and maybe they will be your friends through and through. Maybe a questionable decision you make that resolves the story and has them like join your courtier, maybe that doesn't make them truly loyal though, and maybe you have to reforge alliances in the second part. Maybe people whom you don't help end up falling prey to the storylines that would have claimed them, and they end up falling and actually like dying or something. A great example would be with what was her name again? Tamika. Tamika literally gets into a big bed of hot water with SI, and it can make total sense that she'd be dead in the next part if you don't help her. But if you help her, she is around, and she can be one of your best allies because she's not directly related to the Anarchs or the Camarilla. Like, that's a very useful person to have in your back pocket. That's some amazing things they could have explored. And I don't know, maybe that's their intention, but this game feels like they released it in an alpha, and like, I don't know. It felt like it could have had so much more, and I'm guessing what happened is, again, I think a lot of budget went to the art. I think that they didn't anticipate how long it would take to write up a game like this. Especially because I'm guessing this is, from what I understand, this is the first visual novel slash graphic novel that this company made. And so then you have this understanding of like, oh, okay, well maybe it ultimately was just that. Maybe it was they literally had no inkling of what they were doing. They ran out of time and they had a hard date where they had to release it by, and so they just wrapped it up as best they could and packaged it off. And that's always unfortunate. It's always better to give people time to be able to craft a masterpiece that they can be happy with, because there's a great foundation here, and yet, you know, if you don't put a roof on your house is going to be ruined no matter how great the basement is. So I think this game, unfortunately, is one of the least powerful I've ever played through, but it had a lot of good things to it. Man, it got me going. It got me questioning. I always left wondering what was going on. I had tons of questions, and some of them were answered, and some of them couldn't be answered. I loved kind of dipping into some of the history lore of Cain and the where vampires came from, how the various forces of darkness work in this world. And it's definitely got me curious to want to play the game myself sometime and explore it more. But I don't know if I can really give a good stamp of approval for this. I wish it were better. I genuinely wish it were better, because it could have been. It had so much potential. I've heard rumblings they might do an expansion on this, like some kind of like a free DLC or something. Maybe they've heard a lot of criticism about how it just feels unfinished. But at this point, it might be a little too little too late. I don't know what exactly their game plan is. I don't want this to be the end. I'd like to see these guys try their hand at maybe like continuing the story, or maybe making graphic novels and visual novels of something else. The vampire IP is a pretty powerful one, and I think especially with Bloodlines coming out, if it's as popular as I think it's going to be, we could see a resurgence in interest. And maybe that's another thing. Maybe that was the motivation of this game and why it was coming out so quick. I think they were worried that Bloodlines was going to overshadow it if it came out second. So they wanted to rush it out to make sure it came out first. Obviously, they didn't see COVID coming. Otherwise, they might have been able to take the extra time. But I think that they probably rushed it so they could get it out like while the hype is building for Vampire Masquerade, but like not before it gets sucked away into the bubble that will be Bloodlines 2. But that's just theory crafting at this point. I don't really know for sure. I guess, was there anything else? I think some of the side stories and stuff, like I said, were good. A lot of the side characters were super mysterious, maybe to a fault, where, like, for instance, I really wanted to know more about Agathon's, like, the leader, that, like, the short girl with the glasses who was, like, in charge. I wanted to know more about her, but we only hear like a little bit of rumors. It would have been fun to explore her character. I think it would have been interesting if we'd actually been able to spend time with her as our character, and kind of got to see and understand her more than just this like sarcastic lady who lives above a bookstore. Again, the universe is so rich and it could have pulled so much, but I feel like there was just a lot left in the dust. Maybe they assumed that I would know more, but again, this very likely is one of those opening like stories for people. I guess the other person I met with was my stalker, which is actually pictured here right now, though she'll fade in a second. Shoot, what was her name? Because she doesn't pop up because she's not really a companion, because she turns out to be an agent for like Mr. Tall and Bad. I don't even remember his name because he literally was had so little impact to the story overall. But yeah, so Tall, Dark, and Crazy Lady was very much an interesting one. I hoped that she would have like a fly-in moment. Adelaide, that was her. Adelaide, where she kind of would come in and save us at the last second. Like I thought maybe before. Oops, sorry, I hit the microphone. That she might have come in at the last second, saved us from like the big bad at the end, but no, she ended up being part of the big bad. I just don't even know. Like again, the biggest failing in here is the ending. The fact that it really had no impact. That your character had no impact. They could have done so much more with this. I think it could have been something great, and it didn't have to be long. But it had to be intentional, and it really just doesn't feel like it was this short intentionally. Especially because the tone of the story, it goes from like intense to like kind of like intriguey to intense to dead. Like it's two big peaks. And the what's supposed to be the climax is just so like you would almost feel the wheel, the control being ripped from your fingers, and you know that's really all that there is. There's nothing to it other than that. So yeah, unfortunately I don't think there's much else I really need or can say. The game's fun, it had a lot of potential. I'm disappointed that it didn't deliver as much, but I'm also impressed with a lot of things I did see. Technically wise, it's a fantastic example of how a kinetic visual novel can really work at building aesthetic. It can work as building something beautiful, artistic, and not just an experience, but an almost like a inviting experience, something that pulls you in. Like I love especially this title screen here with the lightning in the background and the sound effects of things like just having streets and crowds and stuff. These touches are just so powerful. I think they did have something really special here. I do think the universe has a lot to offer, so I hope this isn't the last we see. Like I said, I think they're releasing something else, but I'm not going to feature it on the channel. It's time to move forward. Maybe if they release a new title, I'd be interested in it. But again, ultimately, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to play this game. Those of you who worked your blood, sweat, and tears to write and produce this, thank you for doing it. I imagine that you are as frustrated as anybody else by the flaws of this game because it could have been better. But I'm grateful that it exists and I got to play it. There's really not much else I want to say because there really isn't much else to say. So thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Thank you for joining me. This is one of our smaller wrap parties, but again, there's not a whole lot of detail to go into at this point. I do know next that we are soon going to be... Oh, fetch. That was my announcement of the stream. Oh, how unprofessional. It should have been on that screen. I'm very sorry. But yeah, so I do have a brief announcement of what we are going to be playing next. It's going to be interesting. I don't really know a whole lot about what I'm getting into, but but that's usually how all Friday slots are. But a friend of mine who provided the game for me says he's really excited to see how I handle it. It does sound like there will have to be some editing, but I'll at least experience the unedited version and can give my comments about it. I'm really trying not to look up too much about it because I don't want to accidentally spoil anything. But it looks like the title is Daoshi. Daoshi is the romaji of it. I'm also seeing like a title card for that's Jiangshi Daoshi. Jiangshi Daoshi. Or that sounds like it's two names in there. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing next week, starting next week. I'm really excited about it. It's been really hyped up for me in the cruelest of ways, where the person was very clear not to say literally anything about the story, but was excited to share it with me, saying that it's been in the process, in the pipeline for a while, and they're really excited to release it. So I will be starting that very, very soon. So thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of the channel. You guys are awesome. I hope that you enjoyed Vampire Masquerade Coteries of New York. I hope it was something that you are interested in, and I'm really excited to share my thoughts of Bloodlines 2. Not formally on the channel per se, but looking at my Discord, I'm sure I'll be ranting and raving about that in the chat room. When I archive the chat room for Vampire Courtiers of New York, I'm sure I'll be talking in there about future Masquerade activities. So keep an eye for that if you enjoyed this series and enjoyed this world. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for joining me on the channel, for being a part of it. I love it. I love being able to share my thoughts with you. We find more and more people every day. It's really exciting to see the channel grow. Thank you for your part of that and being a part of it. And whenever you see this video, thank you for watching the series. And until the next video watching me, I hope to see me in next. I'll see you there.